And now let's take up the story from survivors of the Titanic themselves. First of all, an American passenger, Miss Edith Russell, traveling first class. Where were you just before it happened, Miss Russell?
In the library. The steward had just called out, 11:30, lights out. So I gave him a few letters to post in the morning, told him I'd pay for the stamps, picked up a book and walked forward to my stateroom, which was on the same deck, A11. And as I got in my stateroom, I switched on the electric light, and I noticed a slight jar, followed immediately by a second one, and a third one, which was quite strong enough to make me hold on to the bedpost. The boat came to a full stop. I walked forward to my window and saw a grayish-white mass drifting by. I was very much surprised and decided to take my fur coat and go out on deck and see what it was all about. Well, when I got out on deck, I noticed a gentleman standing by the rail and several people and a large, again, this grayish mass. I said, "What on earth is that?" "That? Oh, madam, that's a lifeboat. That's an iceberg." "Iceberg? Gracious, I've always wanted to see one of those things since I was a child." "Well, you're seeing it clocker now. There's 1/8 above the water and 7/8 below, and believe me, that's some iceberg." So, after that, we picked up bits of ice, played snowballs for a little while, and it was very, very cold. I asked one of the officers if there was any danger. He said no, and I went back to bed.
As simple as that. No danger as far as you were concerned.
No danger.
Now, what about Mr. Witter, second-class smoking room steward? What did you think the Titanic had hit, Mr. Witter?
Well, I didn't think she'd hit anything. I thought she'd dropped a blade from the propeller, you know.
How did you find out what in fact had happened?
Well, I went down to the working alleyway where my cabin is, number 7 Glory Hole. I was standing there talking to 2 or 3 fellas, and the carpenter came along, and I heard him say, "The bloody mailroom's full of water." I said, "What's that ship, mailroom full of water?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Well, what about those bulkhead doors forward?" He said, "They're not holding, Jim." Of course, then I walked into my cabin, number 7 Glory Hole, and I opened my box. I called everybody. I said, "Come along, fellas, get up, she's going down." So I opened my box, took out some matches, some cigarettes, and I said, "Come on, fellas, get out." "What the hell are you talking about?" They said, "Get out of here." And someone threw a boot at me. I said, "Good night, gentlemen." Just as easy as that.
As far as they were concerned, no danger either, not at that time. Well, now, Commander Lightoller, the second officer of the Titanic, died recently, but in 1936 he broadcast his story of that night. And it left 6 compartments open to the sea. The water flowed into the first 6 compartments forward of number 4 boiler room and caused her bows to sink so much that the water flowed over the top of the aftermost watertight bulkhead, filled the next compartment, then overflowed again into the next one, and so on. Well, from that moment, as the captain very well realized, nothing could save the Titanic, and the order was given, lower the boats. Quartermaster Rowe, who's here tonight, was a very surprised man. Where were you, Quartermaster?
I went on watch on the poop at 8 o'clock. At 10 o'clock I read the log and passed it onto the fore bridge. At 20 minutes to 12 I was pacing up and down the deck, and I felt a good jar. I thought that was peculiar. I looked along the side and I saw what I thought was a windjammer, but as it came astern I saw it was an iceberg. The engine was going full speed astern then, so I pulled the lug in. After that it got a bit quiet, except for the blowing off of steam, and heard nothing or see nothing till I saw a lifeboat being lowered on the starboard side. I reported it to the bridge. I asked them if they knew there was a boat being lowered. They said they did, and wanted to know who I was. I said I was the after quartermaster. They asked me if I knew where the distress rockets were. I said yes. They said bring them on the bridge. When Captain Smith saw me bring them up, he told me to fire one, and fire one every 5 or 6 minutes. After about 2 or 3 minutes, he said to me, "Can you Morse?" I said yes, a bit. He said, "Call that light up, tell her where the Titanic's sinking, please get all your boats ready." She never answered.
And that's your strange story, Quartermaster. Just like that.
just like that.
Now, what about a third-class passenger, Mr. Cohen? I think, Mr. Cohen, you'd had a bit of a celebration with the boys that night.
Yes, I did. We had a celebration with a glass of lemonade.
Am I supposed to believe that?
Yes, you was. So my pals do.
Did you get yourself a life belt early on in the
No,
proceedings?
not at the time. The reason was because we thought the Titanic was unsinkable.
When did you really believe at last that she was going down?
When the boat was listing. And then I decided to find a lifeboat. I found it very quickly, and then I went towards the lifeboats. I never had a chance to get in any one of them because the order was women and children first. So as I was 11, 19, I was out of it. So I decided to find my own salvation. I went across to the Devitt, climbed across the Devitt, which was a dangerous thing at Titanic, and went down the rope about 80 feet long and went into the water, into the sea rather.
It sounds easy now, quick, doesn't it, when you tell it?
Yes, it does,
I
but...
bet you wouldn't like to do it now.
No, well, not with this.
I don't know whether they can see you lower down. I don't think they can, but they can imagine it.
Yes.
It's not as bad as they may think.
Yes.
Now, was that lifeboat that picked you up eventually, was it full?
No, it was about 25 people in it. The reason it was fairly empty as it was, because the people on a boat never realised that the boat would sink, and not many people took the opportunity of going into the lifeboats.
A greater risk leaving the ship than staying
That's
aboard.
right, yes.
Let's ask Miss Russell to take up her story again, and let's jump ahead in time. The last we heard from you, Miss Russell, you were going to bed. You decided to go to bed. Now, let's go forward to the time when you were on deck and you asked Wareham, your steward, to go and find your little pig, your mascot. Would you take up from there?
I was on A deck in the lounge when Wareham came along, and I said to him, "Here, Wareham, are my trunk keys. Would you mind taking care of my trunks if I don't get back in time in the morning?" So he said, "You better go in and kiss those trunks goodbye." I said, "You don't think there's any danger, do you? If there is, why, you better go back and get my mascot." My mascot was a little pig, a music box. It had been given to me by my mother after a motor accident fatal to everybody but me in France. So he brought the little pig back. He played the matchich. After that, I was in the direct line of light with Bruce Ismay, who saw me and picked me up like a puppy and threw me down the steps. But I was wearing a sheath dress, very narrow skirt, a long fur coat, a woolen cap, some furs, evening slippers, and one thing another, thin stockings. And I went forward to the rail, looked at that very, very high rail with the lifeboat swinging way out on its davits, and I knew I never could make it, not in that skirt. So as I stood there hesitating, a sailor grabbed this little pig from under my arm and said, "Well, if you don't want to be saved, we'll save your child." And he threw the pig into the lifeboat. Well, I stood there hesitating, and as I said to a gentleman alongside, "Should I leave?" He said, "Definitely, madam." Well, I said, "Can't make it." So now, if you will just sit on my hand, this sailor and I will make a little cradle of our hands. You sit down, put your hand around my neck, and we'll toss you right into the lifeboat. And they did. First thing I did then was to hunt for the little pig. I found it, the bottom of the boat with its legs broken, but it still could play the matchich, and I played it all night long to keep the children from crying.
Thank you, Miss Russell. Well, meantime, the entire crew and all the officers of the Titanic were working frantically. And in the wireless room, the chief radio officer, Jack Phillips, was trying to contact nearby ships. The nearest was the Californian, but her solitary operator had gone to bed. The officer of the watch reported the Titanic's rockets and the disappearance of her lights to the captain, but no action was taken. Meantime, Phillips from the Titanic was sending out the old CQD call, the standard distress signal of those times. But then he changed to SOS the first time it had ever been used at sea. And one of the ships to pick that up was the Carpathia, the captain, Captain Rostron. Now, Harold Cottam, there he is, was the operator of the Carpathia, and he received the signal. And here he is, sending his answer now. Now, this equipment you're using now, Mr. Cottam, I understand is the same as in the Titanic, except for the buzzer that Marconi Marine supplied for the Titanic.
Yes,
is that not right?
Yes.
We've got the coil there,
Yes.
the tuning here,
Yes.
and the receiving.
Yes.
And there was the transmission, was it not?
Yes.
With the spark flying from
Yes.
the points when you pressed the buzzer?
Yes.
And here the charging and distributing apparatus.
Yes.
Now, Mr. Cottam, the Titanic called you in distress. What was your reaction?
Well, she didn't call me. I called her.
Uh-huh.
About 1 o'clock in the morning, after I'd taken the press, or listened to the press, I took a batch of message for her, and with the intention of redirecting them onto her, I called her up. And the only reply I got that she'd struck ice. And I said, was it serious? And she said, yes, this is a CQD, old man. Here's the position, report it and get here as soon as you can. So I took the position and on a scrap of paper and rushed up to the bridge with it. When I got on the bridge, I contacted the officer of the watch, and the information didn't seem as though it had sunk as fast as I thought it ought to, so I rushed down down the ladder and knocked on the captain's cabin, and as I saw a light I rushed in. And he said, who the hell, or words to that effect. And so I said, well, the Titanic struck ice, sir, and she's in distress. I've got the position here. So he said, well, give it me, and he put a dressing gown on and went. So he said, will you confirm this? Go aft and confirm it if you can.
Which you did.
Yes, which I did.
And when you came back, what did he do?
When I came back, he said, well, you'd better go back and tell her that we're going to double bank all the watches on deck and below, and tell him we are
On our way?
on our way.
As fast as you could go.
Yes, as fast as you could go.
Fine, thank you, Mr. Cottam.
Yes.
Well, the Carpathia was on its way, and back on the Titanic, the last lifeboat got away round about 1:20 in the morning, and it had over 60 people on board. From the boat, they watched the ship, with husbands, relations, and friends still aboard, still unable to believe that she was doomed. Commander Lightoller was less than 100 yards away on the top of an upturned boat.
As I watched, I could see her bow getting deeper and deeper in the water, with the foremast sticking up above the surface, whilst her stern lifted higher and higher, till it was right out of the water. When she got to an angle of about 60 degrees, there was a sullen sort of rumbling roar, as her massive boilers all left their beds and went crashing down through the bulkheads and everything that stood in their way. Up to that moment, she had stood out as clear with her rows of electric lights all burning. When the boilers broke away, she was, of course, plunged into absolute darkness, though her huge black outline was still perfectly distinct up against the stars and sky. Slowly she reared up on end, till at last she was absolutely perpendicular. Then, quite quietly, but quicker and quicker, she seemed just to slide away under the surface and disappear.
In the lifeboats, the survivors braced themselves for the rigors of a long night. And one of those survivors, a greaser, Mr. Walter Hurst, got there in a very strange way. What's your story, Mr. Hurst?
Well, I saw the forward part of the boat deck dip underwater, so I jumped overboard. Swim away from the ship, turned around to look at her, but down came the funnel and smashed into the water right in front of my face. I got a gush of wind and dirt through that nearly blinded me, and I felt the cap go off my head and one slipper off my foot. But it didn't take my attention off of this boat, and I see the collapsible boat washed straight over off the deck, within a few yards of me. But I managed to get onto it, and I was followed quickly by the second officer and a few others. But anyhow, she soon got filled up. There was an old man stood next to me. He was complaining all the night long about his head was so cold. Well, I took particular note of that because mine was pretty cold too. But a friend of mine, a shipmate named Lindsay, gave me a drink from a bottle. I thought I was on a good thing. I think it was whiskey or brandy. Instead of that, it was essence of peppermint. Nearly choked me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hurst. Well, meantime, the Carpathia was speeding to the Titanic's rescue, herself dodging patches of ice and huge icebergs.